Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Warcraft video. So, it's actually a pretty big one. Shadow Priests have, well, they've essentially, I'd say, been the most controversial spec of this expansion, and people have really wanted some form of revamp, something going on to solve the issues that they've been facing. And, well, at long last, they are no longer haunted by Voidform's all-or-nothing design. And in some ways, this is good. But in other ways, not everybody is happy. But that said, the class in many ways has actually improved significantly to actually play in day-to-day life. Now, of course, we have played the revamped Shadow Priest on the most recent build of the beta that came out last night. So it's time today to actually run you through what has changed and how it actually feels in-game, which should be quite instructive, really just to let you know, is this something you should be interested in or excited for? Now, first off, though, welcome to August. It's a new month, and as such, it's a new month on Patreon, and for us, it is Monk Month, so in terms of rewards, you can get the rather boozy sticker for your laptop, your notebook, whatever. Of course, we've also got the Monk class pin, we've got the Monk-themed art, and also this month's special, the Dragon bookmark. You can get all of that stuff, and it's quite cute how the dragon head, like, sort of pokes out of your book. So patrons, that's what's up this month. Thank you for all of your support, and with that said, right, let's just get into the Shadow Priest. Now, to quickly go over some problems that have existed in the past for context, essentially Shadow Priest with Voidform was inherently extremely hard to balance. The high end of damage came from the tail end of Voidform, so that basically meant that, you know, skill and sometimes luck and latency would bring you disproportionate gains. And it's that thing where ramping up damage in World of Warcraft is just kind of hard to get to work well, right? Because if you've got ramping up damage, then it can be kind of frustrating to level with, it can be maybe easy to make mistakes with, and it often is a situation where you've got all these downsides to ramping up damage, but the balance considerations of the game mean, well, you can't have that many upsides either. Now, they were busted, the Shadow Priests, in Legion. I mean, it was crazy fun, yes, but the high end of their damage just blew some other classes out of the water. They just needed, you know, the gear, the skill, the latency, and to not be interrupted by boss mechanics. And man, if you look at Warcraft logs, it tells the story. Like, one of the more notable parses is, wait for this, 12 million DPS on Antoran High Command, which is kind of wild. So they had this problem. Now, to deal with how busted Shadow Priest could end up being, what happened is when they moved into BFA, they lost part of their scaling. So the BFA Shadow Priest basically had all the same weaknesses, but the damage scaling part of Voidform was removed, and that meant that they couldn't really reach the insane heights that they had before. And this kind of just ended up feeling bad in a bunch of cases. Most of the gameplay and damage was in Voidform, which took time to get into, but they couldn't stay in Voidform for as long, and it just wasn't as fun. So fundamentally, something needed to change. A bunch of those issues persisted into Shadowlands, and now, after lots of feedback, Blizzard has changed it. So let's get into the actual changes. Voidform no longer drains insanity or stacks haste. It's now just a cooldown. It's a 15-second buff that increases damage by 20% and grants access to the Void Bolt ability. Now, Void Eruption can be used to get into Void form every 90 seconds, so it still is a fairly regular thing. Now, it also grants you 2 charges of Mind Blast for the duration, and it resets it on transformation, but it no longer reduces the cooldown. Now, this is... let's be real, this is way more boring comparatively, right? It's a less unique design. It's fine, we can just come out and say that, it is. But it almost instantly fixes most of Shadow's problems with viability and balance at various different levels. And thankfully, you know, the excitement, right, where it has been removed, Blizzard has been free to add in some excitement elsewhere, and they really have tried to do that. So Devouring Plague is now a 6-second duration, so basically it hits hard and fast. There's then a new passive, Dark Thoughts. For every dot on the target, Mind Flay and Mind Sear have a 2% chance to add a charge to Mind Blast, making it instant and also allowing it to be casted while you are channeling Flay or Sear, which is kind of cool. And that's something that can stack up to 5 times. I think this is great, like adding in charges instead of resetting a cooldown, I think makes for a much better experience, you know? It stops those frustrating situations where it, you know, resets with only 1 or 2 seconds left in the cooldown. That kind of sucks. And I'd actually say, Blizz, you should look into this for the Elemental Shaman instead of sort of pseudo-forcing them to take Echo of the Elements and kind of knocking out a talent row. Anyway, so there's that. Now, being able to bank up these Mind Blasts has got a bunch of fun interactions with the new redesigned shadowy apparitions. So instead of the apparitions working on Shadow Word Pain crits, the priest now sends apparitions out to all targets afflicted with Vampiric Touch whenever they use Mind Blast, Void Bolt, or Devouring Plague. And you actually get 2 apparitions appear if you crit. Now, this is going to look really cool. When people stack up maybe 2 or 3 instant Mind Blasts and then just dump them on a big wave, right? And just have all these apparitions coming in for the AoE. So that's your core stuff in terms of your core changes. Of course, though, we got to talk about the talents because they're pretty darn major too. And there's a few of them that I think could be quite bananas in terms of their cleave. Now, Shadowy Insight is removed because, well, Dark Thought handles the Mind Blast that resets baseline. Now, Shadow Word Void, that's also removed because, well, Voidform now grants you 2 charges of Mind Blast by default, so those are ones that just didn't need to exist. Unfurling Darkness is their new first row talent, so after casting Vampiric Touch, the next Vampiric Touch deals good damage and is actually cast instantly. Now, this can only happen once every 15 seconds, but on beta, the buff has currently got no duration. You can hold the instant cast for 15 seconds, and it'll trigger another buff afterwards. This is clearly unintended, but right now it is pretty fun, so there's one new talent there. Now, there's also the new Psychic Link Mind Blast. It deals 60% damage to targets within 40 yards afflicted by Vampiric Touch. So, yes, that might turn into some big cleave damage, which could be pretty fun. And there has been some talk that the Shadow Priests could be real Mythic Plus beasts if they could start to do this like crazy sort of cleave business. Now, Lingering Insanity is removed because, well, the mechanic that it relied on is gone. Then Dark Voids has been replaced by a Searing Nightmare, which still applies pain and AoE, but in a more fun way. So it's an instant cast spell that does damage and applies Shadow Word Pain to all targets near the enemy. Now, if the enemy has already got pain, then it will do double damage. And the fun part is that it can only be cast when you're channeling Mind Seer. And I think that's something that's kind of interesting. They really do want to increase the amount of channeling that Shadow is doing. And maybe that's just to make it feel a bit closer to like an Aflock. So there's that, because now, right, you can use your Mind Blasts, your Void Bolts, and this Searing Nightmare talent, all while you are channeling Flay and Seer. Now, moving on through the talents, there's also a much simpler new talent called Damnation, and it just applies pain, touch, and devouring plague to a target for free on a 45-second cooldown, and basically that's just really nice for just starting a fight off and sort of keeping you smooth, kind of helping you with that ramp-up time. Now, there is one thing that may not be intended here, but currently, at least based on our testing, it triggers Unfurling Darkness, so you can actually use Damnation to get an instant Vampiric Touch on another target right away via that talent as well, so a bit of a funny mix. Now, moving on to another big change talent, of course, is Void Torrent. Now, because of the Insanity change, it no longer pauses Insanity Drain. So now what it does is it refreshes the duration of dots on the target, and it just gives you 60 Insanity. So, a bit more simple, but the thing there is, like, given the Devouring Plague change, where Devouring Plague is now short but super strong, well, this could be used to extend a Plague during Void Form for some pretty chunky bonus damage. Now, they've also removed Dark Ascension because it no longer fits, and it has been replaced with Ancient Madness, which increases crit when entering Void Form by 30%, but that decreases every 2%, or by 2% every second till it's gone. And then for Surrender to Madness, that has just had its cooldown changed to 90 seconds so that it matches Void Form. And then, well, Legacy of the Void is now exactly that. It keeps the legacy of a Void Form. It returns the resource drain and removes the duration, but the stacking haste is nowhere to be found. So basically, it's kind of a half-assed attempt to satisfy the players who will miss Void Form as it was. So overall, what's up? I know that was a lot to get through, so what's up here? Well, Blizzard have solved so many problems, right? Now, Void Form is a shadow of its former self. It's a shadow of its former self, absolutely. But the spec as a whole is significantly more functional now. So first, the bad news. There's a lot of backlash in the forums. A lot of people, and me too, I loved the fantasy of that Void Form, haste stacking, your sanity going, mad, giving into it for the power. And, I agree, that was such a cool idea. It was so fun to play with in Legion. I loved it. But the core of it, I think, was just obviously not really working with World of Warcraft over time. And I think Blizzard really tried to fix this. They didn't talk much about it, but I've got to imagine that, well, overall, they tried so many little changes to make it better, and I imagine that behind the scenes, they probably spent a lot of time trying to save Voidform, and they're probably quite upset that they've had to make this change, and I do understand players being upset about losing a really cool, unique, spec-defining mechanic that was genuinely really neat. But I think this is maybe a case where the smaller number of players are just going to have to take the hit there to make the class overall be a good bit more functional. It's taken us a long time to undo some of the damage that Legion class design did in the name of fun, and that's a wild thing to say. Most of those things were super successful, but some of the long-term effects have been a bit tricky, and this is just one of those examples. And I think that's the downside of really designing specs for an expansion and what that expansion would bring, and maybe not as much for the long-term health of the game. So, with all that said, how does it actually play? Okay, well, this is the good news, right? This is actually good news for us. It's a lot better. We really do think it's a lot better in general. So far, we've only been doing the initial leveling because of the beta wipe, and there's only like level 50 pre-mades right now, but Shadow Priest just feels so much better in the leveling context. At its core, the gameplay is dotting, using Mind Blast, and then spending Insanity on Void Eruption and Devouring Plague. Voidform just no longer changes your gameplay massively. It just really adds Void Bolt into the rotation and does a few other things, but it's not as big as it used to be. And I think it's more than enough, right? It feels like a powerful moment now instead of really the only moment worth playing your spec for. And in terms of talent builds, like running with Damnation, Unfurling Darkness, and Misery does make, killing one or two mobs at a time much easier, much more playable than before. So finally, Discipline may not be the only recommended leveling spec for him. Then Searing Nightmare, that's an excellent spell. It spends Sanity to basically pulse waves of madness through your Mind Seer. That's pretty cool. And just overall, look, it feels pretty great to play at first, and it actually looks like it's got a lot of tools to deal with loads of different things. Having resources ready for when you need them for Plague and Void Form, maximizing the use of Void Torrent and keeping your Mind Blast and your Void Bolts sort of rolling, that's compelling single target gameplay, so I think it's going to be pretty satisfying in a raid. And then it also looks like it's going to excel in multi-target cleave, where you're generating loads of shadowy apparitions, and the extra Insanity generation for more plagues that are being spread around as well. So that should actually feel quite good in terms of pace and just the cool things that you're doing with your spec. In fact, if they stay like this, they may really be just complete cleave monsters, especially like with Searing Nightmare. I mean, you can Mind Seer, pump Insanity into lots of extra damage and dots, and then use all of your instant Mind Blasts. I mean, that seems really strong. So, to describe, this really, I think, is what catches it. To describe the difference in feeling, Shadow Priest before was just frustrating for a lot of the time. Just kind of was, right? Like, you're starting a fight, you've got to deal with the ramping stuff, and you finally get into Void Form, but it just doesn't really feel that good because it's a bit toothless as compared to where it used to be. So it just felt frustrating a lot of the time. This one does not really feel frustrating at all. It's got a lot of fun moments, and it's got, strong points to it. Overall, I would say Blizzard have actually done a really good, targeted job here. Now, that said, it's far from finished, right? There's some bugs, there's some balance concerns between abilities, some odd leftovers like Void Eruption needing 90 Insanity to cast, but not using any, essentially just sort of forcing you to overcap Insanity or waste time in your refreshed Mind Blast. They also need to reevaluate the Covenant abilities for this, new design. There's some concerns still about how little they can move, especially now that, you've got the slightly controversial Void Bolt during Mind Flay thing being extended to your Mind Blast procs, which was, that was a bit of feedback from the past iteration of the Shadowlands changes. Basically, moving while using instant spells is great for most casters, but with this, how, yes, you can move with your instance, but you ideally want to be channeling and then doing your instance. That will make sort of moving feel like a DPS loss, which for some people is seen to be mildly frustrating, and I can understand that. It's a minor point, but I think just a constant part of the player experience, right? And it is fine for them to have just a bit of this as a weakness, provided their strengths make up for it all. But overall, I'd say Blizzard have done a good job with this so far, and a few minor changes and just a tight check in the balance should actually make this a really strong part of the Shadowlands class lineup. And that's really something interesting to say, because it wasn't looking like that previously. I mean, we all looked at the Shadow Priest. The Shadow Priest community looked at the Shadow Priest. It was not really great, and it seems like this is moving in a way better direction. And for this sort of tier of change to be happening, like this, I say this late, but you know, this is a beta change, right? Like doing a class revamp in a beta, where a beta is usually more about bugs, polish, and things like that, that's definitely quite something. It's definitely nice to see the Blizzard actually willing to do that. And yeah, I'd say they've probably unlocked this from being a slightly not that playable spec to being a very playable spec as we hit this new expansion. So I'm glad Blizzard actually took things to heart here. I wish they communicated a little bit more of this, of course, about what they plan to do, but nonetheless, this is actually pretty darn good. So, well done, Blizzard. You actually listened to people, and I think you made some pretty good changes. Yes, a bit of that unique spice has been lost, but on the other hand, we now have a spec that has got, I think, some pretty good strengths, a lot of cool moments. It's not as crazy and unique, but it is like another flavor of the sort of multi-daughter. It feels different to Athlock. So yeah, I actually think it fits a gameplay niche pretty darn well. Overall, good job, Blizz. I'm pretty darn happy with how you've handled this one. And with that, well, that's it for this video. Of course, you know, like, sub, all that good stuff. You can check out all of the cool goodies like this and the pin and everything else on our Patreon. And yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this revamp, and I'll see you next time.